The Winnipeg Jets season is not that far away, just a couple months now, and we're actually going to start rolling into camp here pretty soon. What should we look for as a lot of young hopefuls try to make the Winnipeg Jets? Let's chat about that on tonight's episode.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we are still waiting for the Sandberg and KFC contracts, and just to address an interesting comment or two we got on the last video, I know people are talking about $6 million or whatever, sounding like a lot for Sandberg. Just want to start off by saying I think this is just the new market. We have seen guys who aren't necessarily big point scorers like Gavrikov getting paid pretty big money, and I just wouldn't be shocked. I think that's on the high end, but I just think that the league is moving in a new direction with this new cap, and stuff like this is going to be maybe a little more of a common occurrence, even for players who don't have a lot of career points. So something to keep in mind as we head into a very interesting next couple of weeks. I don't have a crystal ball, but given what we've seen in the free agent market, just don't be shocked if that sticker price has some real heft to it, especially for a player who doesn't necessarily look like a guy who usually gets paid a lot of money. Now, tonight's show, I want to focus on the interim in some camp battles, right? We have some really intriguing stuff coming up over the next few months, and I think Winnipeg is in a very interesting spot where I don't really have a great feeling of what this team is going to look like come, October. And so that opens up a lot of real chances for guys who are brought in and some of the existing talents to really fight out for spots. We have different guys like Parker Ford, who you see a cheeky little joke there at the end. I want to talk a little bit about him, but you also have real competition for some of the established veterans. And I want to chat about which battles I think are going to be the most important and which ones we should really watch out for as we head into preseason. Before we dive into all of that, though, I did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, like I said, camp this year, I think, is going to be a little more intriguing. Unlike last year, where the Jets very much opted for a very veteran-heavy roster, I think Winnipeg is going to try some of that this year with a couple of key caveats. Winnipeg is kind of in this position where right now I don't think that they're super invested in spending a lot to get this roster up to par. I think the Jets were really hot to trot for Brock Besser. That didn't pan out. They might be in on Mason McTavish, which could be a real thing. But other than that, we really haven't heard of big rumors for trades or signings. So for the most part, we're just kind of in a bit of a lull. Obviously, the contract extensions the Jets need to get done probably take some level of precedence. But I think Winnipeg is also trying to figure out how the heck do you upgrade this team? And I think this year's camp battles really could be a very interesting thing. For one, we still are trying to figure out what exactly Jonathan Toews is going to be at the start of the season. Lowry's going to be out for who knows how long, and we really don't know what he's going to be like when he comes back from injury. So Toews right now is your de facto 2C, but if you really can't hack it in camp, you're going to need somebody else to step up. This battle for the 2C spot, I think, is going to be a tougher one than people realize. We know Nemesnikov has traditionally held this spot. Vlad can kind of do it, but I think it's really one of those situations where ideal world, he is in your bottom six. I love Vlad. I think he's a really hardworking player. Dude seriously takes pucks like, I don't know, man. He just swallows them. It's crazy. I've never seen a dude take this many shots, look like he's visibly contorting in agony, and still getting up and skating the next shift. The guy is just made of something that must be what Wolverine is made of. But as far as the offensive chops to be a 2C is concerned, Vlad doesn't really have that. And so Winnipeg needs to figure out who the heck is going to anchor this spot? And I think there's some real competition, not only for this spot, but really for a lot of the center roles. I don't think that they're really clearly defined past Scheifele. Now, Taves may be being typecast as the 2C, but if he really can't get his feet going in camp and it just looks like he's 10 steps behind, the Jets really may need to adjust their strategy. And again, this is absent of them making any changes, any big trades. I think that there's a real audition here for the spot. And I think Lambert could have a really outside shot at this. Taves, I think, is currently the favorite. Nemesnikov is probably the second most preferential option just because he's the veteran. He's done this before, and Winnipeg kind of knows what they're getting out of him. Obviously, it's not really what I think they want to do, but it's their stopgap solution if Taves really just doesn't have the feet to get him up to speed, especially to start the season. That may change as time goes on, but certainly to start the year, I think Winnipeg and Taves to a point are probably measuring some of their expectations. If you start to realize that that's not maybe working out the best, this is where I think Lambert really needs to have a killer camp. Brad obviously is waiting in the wings to be some kind of an NHLer, and I still think he's going to be a winger. I just don't see him being that 2C option, and I think Brad is more in line to be a winger competition for this camp battle for Ehlers' spot, right? Obviously, Nick is gone, and so there's a pretty noticeable gap in the middle six where you need a really fast, really skilled winger. And I think Lambert's probably the easiest plug and play. I know they've brought in Pearson and Nyquist, but neither of those guys do that kind of stuff. Both are probably like bottom six guys for the most part. And I think if we're looking at how this Jets team is constructed, ideally, you could do like a really interesting line with Koepka, Taves, and Nyquist. I think that there's some foot speed issues, but if that's like a fourth line, that could really do some real damage. But I think there's really some camp battles here for, maybe that second line winger spot, especially on the right side. Chibrikov could get a look there. Obviously, Perfetti is likely to have one of those winger spots on the second line, most likely either left or right. They've occasionally flip-flopped him depending on who's, capable of playing up there. And so I think the Jets could maybe look at Lambert at left wing or right wing, either one of those, depending on how they want to approach it, whichever they feel his best side is on. But they might also give Chibrikov a look here. And so I think that there's that battle. And because of that, I sort of wonder how this third line is going to look, especially with Lowry gone. The third line might have some real camp competition. And, I don't think it usually gets a lot of attention, but I think with how Winnipeg is built, this stuff is really crucial to how this season's going to start. I have a very hard time envisioning exactly what this lineup's going to look like, but I do feel to a degree that we're probably going to see CSV as your first line. I wouldn't be shocked if we see Nemesnikov and Perfetti on the second, maybe with his Chibrikov or a Lambert. On your third, maybe this is where you see like a Nino, a Taves, and maybe a Chibrikov as well, if he doesn't hack it in the second line spot. And then on your fourth, you could really do anything, right? I think you have a lot of guys to choose from. Obviously, Gustafsson can play center. You've got you've got a couple of different guys, right? You've got Koepka, you've got Parker Ford. I mean, the Jets have a wealth now of fourth liners plus Pearson and Nyquist to fill out. So they really could do anything. And Barron, of course, just extended. So he's likely to have an inside role at that either 4C or 4 left wing spot. Would really prefer the 4C, but I'm sure the Jets will do something there. So, I just feel like this is a very unpredictable lineup, and I don't think it's going to be business as usual for the team. So camp might be the most interesting we've had in a while. I think that there's real opportunity for the youth to impress and maybe even take a spot from some of the new signings, especially since the Jets don't seem abundantly committed to some of the new guys. So keep an eye out for that. But there is one guy that I think has a very interesting injury call-up opportunity. This guy is Brayden Yager, and I've talked a little bit about him before. I want to chat about why I think he's a little closer to the league than a lot of folks may be expecting, and how he could find himself with Winnipeg. All coming just right up. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and then you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without all the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group of friends. Gametime makes it all possible and cheaper. Of course, Gametime makes it super easy to buy tickets. It's fast, you get instant delivery, and prices on the apps actually drop the closer you get to first pitch. And you've even got incredible last-minute deals, zone deals, and clear seat views so you know exactly what you're paying for. I did this for Ravens playoff tickets. It was great. Had a panoramic view of my seat. I got all of the fees and prices up front, so I didn't have any surprise charges. It was great, and it all came with a lowest price guarantee. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's show as we're chatting a little bit about some of the camp battles and really intriguing X factors heading into a very unpredictable season. I think the Jets are in a weird spot where a lot of their Plan A stuff did not work at the start of summer, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily in a bad spot, even if maybe the season has a slight turn, right? Now, I've seen a lot of people argue the Jets are running it back with the same squad, and I just don't think people understand that when you sub in 2 to 3 forwards and you're going to be missing Lowry, and one of those forwards is, 38 and hasn't played in a couple of years, that's a lot of unknowns. Nyquist and Koepka, those guys, Pearson too, you sort of know what you're getting with them. But Taves might be your 2C, and you really don't know what state he's going to be in. So that introduces a lot of uncertainty for the Jets. And it also means that there's probably more of a window to an opening for a guy like Brayden Yager to really make his mark. Now, Yager came into camp last year, not last year, but at the start of the season. And I thought he looked really impressive. Of a lot of the Jets prospects, he had a very pro-ready approach. And I know people are going to look at his World Junior stuff and Team Canada stuff and say, he was in the bottom 6 for a while, wasn't really that impressive, yada, yada, yada. I don't care about that. I care about what he starts doing against pro-level players. And we saw some of those shifts against guys who were, dealing with more AHL or better pro experience. And Yager didn't look out of place. In fact, I think what stood out to me was, A, his skating is very proficient, which we knew, but B, he has a really good head on his shoulders. Occasionally, he'll make a naive pass or whatever, but that's kind of what you'd expect with a guy who's not even a pro yet. He will be this season, but by and large, you're seeing a young kid kind of getting to grips against pro level competition. Now, though, I think he really is going to come into camp this year and really put on a spectacle to the point where he's not going to make the Jets out of camp. But I do think that if there's an injury crisis, I would not be shocked if he's one of the first names that Winnipeg looks towards. Obviously, the Jets' center depth is going to have a real issue without Lowry. And if Taves really can't get going, you suddenly find yourself running out of options very quickly. Yes, you could call on Lambert to do it, but the first stint that he had last season didn't exactly wow people. You could try and maybe appoint maybe a Gustafsson to do this job temporarily behind Nemesnikov and Barron, but I don't think that that's Winnipeg's real preference. For whatever reason, they don't seem to love Gustafsson that much, at least when it comes to Arneal's usage of him. So, yeah, I feel like this opens a door for a Yager call-up. And I think Braden's going to have one of the situations where he'll probably do pretty well with the Moose, especially with the two-way aspects of his game. I don't know if the goal scoring is necessarily going to pop immediately, but I think he exhibited a lot of the traits of what's going to make a very projectable, very solid pro very quickly. Again, because he's going to be, a first-year rookie, I don't really anticipate him winning a spot out of camp. He would have to be the most unmissable player in Jets prospect history to really get that nod. Now, maybe he does come into camp and he just absolutely smokes the competition, blows the doors off, and basically makes it impossible for the Jets to send him down. That is technically a possibility. I just don't think it's very likely. Lambert will already be probably of the young kids your preferred option, and I don't think that the Jets really look at him as the preferred option. I know Chevy gave him some mention, especially with respect to what is going to be a slower Jets team. And obviously, Lambert's going to be one of the guys that I think they're looking towards to be one of those wide players that brings that skating and that electric speed. But uh, I don't really think that there's any of these rookies that Winnipeg believes is going to be your middle six center option. So Yager, I think, is going to be a call up. And I think it would probably be towards the second half of the season, unless the injury crisis really, really gets bad. And at that point, you're having much bigger conversations about the Jets maybe needing to make a trade of some sort. They already probably do with this current team, but again, health situations being a primary determinant, that would be a different conversation. So with Yager, I do think that he's closer than people expect. I know that there's been some skepticism about that, but Brayden, he for me is probably Winnipeg's number one or number two prospect. He rose really quickly, and I think what we've seen with him in the juniors and some of the early preseason and training camp stuff, it's going to make him a very late cut this year. And I think he's probably going to be a little further up the rookie call-up list than maybe some of the other guys you'd normally expect. And I already think he'll have his NHL debut this year. Maybe it even happens out of preseason. Again, I doubt it. That doesn't really happen with the Jets. They don't usually make that their kind of MO unless it's like a really all-star prospect who has had some sort of unmissable preseason. Barring a surprise, I don't think that's going to be Yager's debut this year. But I'm completely leaving the option open. If he does, it would also really change how this team looks heading into October and what they need. If Yager really proves that he's actually ready for pro duty and maybe has like a Stankoven kind of breakout or whatever, it would make your conversation about what you want to trade for a little bit different. Yager is really, to me, an X factor in this team. And again, I think it's a lot to ask of a young player, especially a first time pro rookie, to step into an NHL lineup. We just don't really see that happen as much these days, much less with players who haven't had pro experience before, are obviously under 21 and are coming into a very high skill gap league. The ceiling right now for even fourth liners is very high, and so Yager, I think, would have to do something pretty tremendous to earn that spot. But I'm not ruling it out, and I think that that's very exciting because it kind of also hints at the next core being a little closer than it appears. I think over the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see a lot of the current crop start to graduate and really start taking NHL roles. I think the Jets don't really have a choice in some ways because the way that the market's going to move is going to price Winnipeg out of a lot of free agents. But I also think that this is just about the team getting back to its roots. The Jets used to be a big draft and develop team. They got away from that. They went very veteran heavy for many years. They accomplished a good deal, but the playoff success was always something that really held them back. This time, if they really start to rely on the kids and the youth that they're drafting, adding the skill and talent to a team that really wins by committee, I think could have tremendous dividends paid out. I look at guys like Walton. I think he, to a point, Barlow certainly. There's a lot of guys in this crop of young players who could actually boost the middle six and really give the Jets some firepower. I don't know if any of them are going to be surefire top sixers. Maybe you see that with Walton, and if his growth continues, that could be something to look out for. But, I think even if all you get out of this group of rookies is a lot of depth, that would help out a lot, especially skilled depth. And I think Yager's going to be one of those guys who really leads ahead of that pack. I don't think that there's a world where he's not a good player. Even if he caps out at like a 3C, that's pretty awesome for the Jets. I think he has a very mature game. I think he'll hit the ground running pretty quickly. I think his adjustment period, even with the Moose, is going to be short. So look out for him this season. I think he's going to put on a real show. I have a lot of faith in him. And so far, he really hasn't done anything to dissuade me that he's not ready to seize an NHL role in the near future. I think it's coming. I'm excited for it. I hope you are too. Let me know how you're feeling about Brayden Yager's development. Do you feel like he's going to be a guy who's fighting for a roster spot out of camp? Do you think he'll start the year with the Moose? Or do you think he's not even going to have his NHL debut this year? I would put $5 down on that last one not happening. But hey, you know what? The Jets have done some funky things before. Maybe they want to postpone it just a bit, or he really does struggle. But I've got a lot of confidence in our return from the Rucker McCourty trade. So hopefully Yager does really well and hits the ground running. Now, one last guy that I want to spotlight a little bit, and I realized I didn't talk about him a couple of days ago when the Velarde thing was announced because obviously the Gabe extension was the big deal. But there's a guy that's kind of getting a little bit overlooked, and I think that's Parker Ford. He signed a 2-year, two-way deal, and I think Ford honestly deserves a little more love. I'll talk about why coming right up. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're chatting about some camp stories and things to watch out for heading into a very hard to predict preseason and really ultimately Jet season in general. But one guy that I think maybe hasn't really gotten much conversation at all is to talk about Parker Ford. Now, Ford is a very interesting guy. He's come out of college a couple of years ago. He was playing for Providence, which is funny enough where Brandon Tanev used to play. And Ford, he came into camp last year. I thought he looked really good. He had a pretty successful first Moose season, came into camp looking really energetic, and I thought his fourth line presence, especially for what you ask of them on this Jets team, was really noticeable. He's fast. He's direct. He's got enough skill to stay afloat and keep up. And I feel like aside from maybe one of his 3 games with the Jets that didn't quite go super well, the other 2 games with him, I came away feeling like he's an NHLer. Ford obviously had really bad luck and got hurt for a good chunk of the season. So he not only missed a lot of the Jets season, he also missed a ton of the Moose season. And, it's a shame because I think Parker actually had a real chance of being the guy that Winnipeg wanted Brandon Tanev to be. Obviously, Tanev, age 33, 34, probably not the guy that he once was. I think Parker has a lot of similar traits, but with a little more skill that makes me feel like he's got something, some real jump to his game. At the AHL level, he's been, either at or above about a half a point per game, which for his first year with the Moose, like 40 points in 70 odd games, I thought that was really impressive. Last year, the production did take a bit of a hit. He was at more like half a point per game, but also kind of important to remember that the Moose offense was just crap. So I think what we saw with Ford in camp is probably a better indicator of what we're going to see, especially as he comes into this preseason. Now, his 2-way deal does make me feel like he's probably starting the year off with the Moose. Not that, I think that's a bad thing. Manitoba, quite frankly, needs all the help it can get. Parker Ford will easily be a very good top sixer for them. And with that team kind of needing to really consolidate talent and become a lot more competitive, I don't hate the idea of Ford starting down there. But if I look at him versus Pearson or Nyquist or even Koepka, I don't know if any of those guys are necessarily clear out and out above him. Nyquist obviously has a bigger track record of NHL success. Pearson did at one point, but you look at where they are now, and Nyquist needs a lot to really be successful, especially as a scorer. And Pearson's just, he's on the wrong side of 30. I like Tanner, and I liked his forechecking ability several years ago. The version of Pearson that the Jets are likely to get right now is probably going to have some issues keeping up. And so a Ford might actually help the Jets get up the ice a little bit faster. And I think with how Winnipeg is going to be this year, that might have some really outsized impact. I know it sounds silly to talk about bottom 6 guys in this way, but I think with the Jets, it's really about avoiding death by 1,000 cuts. Winnipeg has to do things differently than a lot of other teams. They're built from the goaltender out. And if you look at it that way, it also kind of means that any chance that you can have to make sure that your 4 lines keep rolling, that they avoid the DZ as much as possible, and that they're able to get the puck up the ice, that's really what you want to focus on. And so I think a Ford type for me is a guy who can really do that. And in camp, he has a lot of the traits that I feel like Arniel likes. He's impetuous. He's fun. He does have, some defensive chops in, forcing turnovers and winning some physical battles. and he's got a decent shot. He's not exactly a guy who's afraid to score a couple of goals. That kind of stuff for me goes a long way, and I feel like his AHL production already was decent enough to where I do project him to be maybe a 20-point guy at the NHL level. That's pretty good. 15 to 20 points for a fourth liner these days, especially one that you've got for a couple of years. That is about as good as it gets, especially a guy who's not a drag on possession, somebody who can offer some defensive two-way presence, and who's not afraid to mix it up in the corners. So, Ford, I think he goes a little bit under the radar in Winnipeg's pool, but don't write him off. I like him as a guy that the Jets can call upon in case of injury, and arguably he might really deserve a shot out of camp. I'm going to be keeping an eye on him this preseason. I think he has a real chance to maybe steal a fourth line spot from somebody. It's obvious that David Gustafson's probably a little more on the outs. Koepka, I don't really know if he's going to be good enough. He was decent with the Bruins, but I can't really say that Koepka blew the doors off either. And it's not like Pearson or Nyquist are guaranteed locks. I think Nyquist probably is, but Pearson, he's going to have more of a competition for one of those bottom six spots. So I don't think any of this is written in stone. I would keep an open mind. And if Ford really does impress, especially coming out of preseason, I do really root for him to make the Jets. I thought he looked great last year in his couple of games. Would love to see the kid get some real time at the NHL level this season. But if nothing else, he's going to be a really good player for the Moose. And Manitoba being competitive can only mean good things. I really feel like it's hard to overstate how important it is for this Jets team to really make Manitoba a force to be reckoned with. I know AHL success for a lot of people is kind of like, but I think for guys like Lambert and Yager, Walton, all these kids who are going to be coming into this environment, introducing them to a really successful org to begin with might really change how they view Winnipeg as a whole. I'm sure they're all going to be honored to play for the Jets or even for the Moose, but if you want to retain your talent, if you really want to build that attractive culture, then starting even with just the AHL introduction being really good could go a long way to proving to a lot of these rookies how serious the Jets are about being a successful winning organization at every level. Culture and success breeds commitment. And I think that that's something that I really hope the Jets take to heart. I think they're starting to push in that direction based on this offseason we've seen with the Moose. Obviously, to be determined with the Jets squad itself. But, I also understand that there's a lot of things with the Jets that they have some level of control over and some areas where they're going to have to sort of wait and see what shakes out. So lots of intriguing camp battles, lots of unpredictability here. I'm hoping that maybe by tomorrow we even get a contract extension announcement for maybe one of our big RFAs. Can't really say that I'm concerned about the Sandberg's extension, but I would like to see it. I think we all would. I'd love to hear the dollar amount so I can say I told you so, even though I don't really have that sort of petty streak in me. So love to see what happens. Hope that the Jets get it done, and hope that we close out this week with a really cool extension announcement. So we'll be back here tomorrow, hopefully with some Sandberg news. But for tonight's show, that is all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.